Hey guys, thanks for tuning in again. Michael from TechDiffuse here, and in this video I will show you how you can use nested loops in Python. Okay guys, so if you have no idea what a loop is in Python or a loop general in the programming language, I recommend you to watch my other video about loops where you can learn the basics about loops. So if you once have grasped the concept of a loop, you already know the half of the concept of a nested loop, because a nested loop is nothing else than a loop inside of a loop. Okay, so you might ask yourself now, why do we need a loop inside a loop? Consider that. Sometimes you have a data structure where you have a list inside a list. So this is very much possible. You have a list and one element of the list, for instance, is not an integer, like a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but a list can also hold a list as an element. So for example, you have a list with 3 elements, so index 0, 1 and 2, and in the first list at index 0 is another list with, I don't know, 4 elements. So you have a list 1, at index 0 a list with 4 elements, and in the first list on the second element you have another list, for instance with 4 elements, and so on. And therefore we need a loop inside a loop to reach those elements. So we iterate over the outer list, which contains other lists, and in the second loop we iterate over the actual list inside the outer list. Okay, so I know if you first heard of this concept, this might be confusing, but let me show you an example in code. Another way to make this concept a bit more clear is to think of a loop inside a loop like a quadrant. So a quadrant it has the same length as the height. So we can make a loop which has the same amount of passes in the outer loop as in the inner loop. So we change our values back to 4 here, and we get rid of the outer print statement, and we make the following. We make print, and now we print here the I and the j value, and let's see what happens. So once again, the first column indicates the amount of loops in the outer loop. So we have 3 times 1, so this is outer loop 1, outer loop 1, outer loop 1. And for our execution of outer loop 1, we have the execution of the inner loop 1. Outer loop 1, inner loop 2, outer loop 1, inner loop 3. So this time it looks different because we print every loop pass of the outer loop also in the inner loop. If you remember, in the example before, we have printed the amount of loop passes of the outer loop outside of the inner loop. And this time we have printed the inside. So this is the reason why the amount of loop passes of the outer loop are also printed out every time the inner loop runs. And the same thing goes for the second run. Second run of the outer loop, first run of the inner loop. We are still in the second run of the outer loop, and it's the second run of the inner loop. We are still in the second run of the outer loop, and it's the third run of the inner loop. And the same with the third one. So this is another example to imagine how the loops are functioning. But there is an even better way to understand how this works. Let's see. So what we're doing here now is, you see that for every loop pass we get a new line. And this can be, for me at least, visually be a problem. In my imagination, it is much easier if we have one row for every outer loop. Let me explain what I mean by that. So the print statement in Python makes automatically a line break. So every print statement, once the print statement is done, we have a line break. So to prevent a line break, there's a nice little hack. You just write and make those semicolons. So you don't have to remember this at this point. It's just to demonstrate you how we can have a single row of printouts. So let's execute it and see what happens. Aha, so and there you go. We have only 3 rows now, and this is exactly what I said. We have, for every outer loop, we have exactly 1 row. So the first row indicates the outer loop, the first outer loop, the second row indicates the second outer loop run, and the third row indicates the third outer loop run. So now the formatting is a bit weird here, and we can fix this by adding some spaces, and now it looks much better. So now it should become clear to everybody. Let's see. So we have the I for the first outer loop pass and the J for the first inner loop pass. We have still the I1 for the outer loop pass 1 and the J for the outer loop pass 2. The I1 for the outer loop pass 1 and the 3 for the inner loop pass. And the same in the second row. Every first number indicates the second outer loop pass, and the second number indicates the inner loop pass, and the same at the third row. So this is a nice representation of what is going inside. If I get rid now of the I, it was just a helper, and execute, these are the values in every row for the inner lists. So as I said, for instance, we have a list in the outer loop that consists of lists inside this list. And these are the elements of the lists inside of a list. Imagine you have a list of a person, and every person has a lot of details, a lot of attributes. So a person has a forename, a last name, a birth date, a place where it lives, and so on. So these values are a list itself. And if you want to print a list of the values inside of this list, you have to make something like a double loop, a loop inside a loop. So this may be a use case to have it a bit more clear why we have to do this. So a quick reminder, guys, if you liked the video so far, please give me a like and subscribe. It would help me a lot for the YouTube algorithm to grow this channel. Thanks. So typically you don't want to just print out the values inside nested loops, but you want to do something with the values. And now I want to show you one possibility how you can do this. For instance, we can sum up the values of the loop. So just define a variable mySum. So we have the variable mySum. It's 0 at this point, and we make our loop. So again, 1 to 4. Then we make our inner loop, this time J. In range 1 to 4. Okay, so and now we have our mySum variable, and we want to add up just 2 values to make it simple. So to do this, we take mySum from the previous run and just add 1. So this means in every loop pass we add 1. Pretty simple. So at the first iteration our value is 0, then it is 1, 2, 3, and so on. And yeah, and we want to print it out. So we print out mySum. And again, we want to prevent that we have a line break. We want a line break here after every row. Okay, so let's see what happens. Aha, so what are we seeing here? Okay, we started mySum with 0. So at this point it is 0. But if we come to the inner loop, it happens the following. The first row is again represents the outer loop, and every number in the first row represents 1 loop pass in the inner loop. So the first is the result of the first loop pass in the inner loop. We have my sum, it was 0, and we added 0 plus 1, and then we printed it out. There's 1. So far, so good. Then the first loop of the inner loop is done, and we have the second loop. And then we add again. My sum at this point is already 1, as we see here. We add 1, print out, we have 2. And the loop pass is done. And the next loop pass, we have 2 plus 1 is 3. All right. The inner loop is done completely, and we print, we have a line break, and the first loop of the outer loop is done. So we come to the second loop pass. And again, my sum at this point is 3, we add 1, and we have 4. The next loop, we have 5, the next loop pass, we have 6, and the inner loop is done. We print out, have a line break, we come here, and the third loop pass of the outer loop starts. And then my sum at this point is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. Next loop pass plus 1 is 8. Next loop pass plus 1 is 9. We have print, line break, and there you go. This is a simple way of handling variables inside of nested loops. And as I already indicated in the first example of this video, the nested loops don't have to be always symmetrically. So they don't always have to be the same rows as the same columns. And one way to display it graphically, I will show you now. So for instance, we start again with a loop for I in range, let's say 1 to 6. 1 to 6 means we have 5 numbers we print out. We have our inner loop, we have for j in range, and we start at 1, and now it becomes interesting. Now the number of the second number, our ending number, you know, we start with 1 and we end with the second number, is dependent on the first one, the first outer loop. So this means we take the I from here and we make, let's say, plus 1. By the way, I make an error here, make it a j. Okay, so this means in every loop pass of the inner loop, we go one bit further than the I of the outer loop. Okay, so what I mean by that? In the first run, we start with 1, and the I is 1. So we have 1 plus 1 is 2. This means that the first time the outer loop runs, the inner loop will run only 1 time, and it's done. Then, again, the second loop of the outer loop is ready. I is 2, and this means we have 2 plus 1 is 3. Okay, so now for the second run of the outer loop, the inner loop runs 2 times. And again, in the next run, 2 times is done. The outer loop is at its third run, and the inner loop will run 3 plus 1 to 4, 1 to 3 will run 3 times. So for every outer loop, the inner loop runs 1 more. And to see this graphically, we print our value j. So we make our end statement to prevent the line break. And we make the print statement here to have a line break after every row. So let's see what happens. So there you go. The first row consists only of 1 element. And this is exactly what is to be expected, because for the first outer loop, so every outer loop pass is represented in 1 row, we only have 1 inner loop pass. And for the second outer loop pass, we have 2 inner loop passes. For the 3 outer loop pass, we have 3 outer loop passes, and so on, 4 times and 5 times. So, and this is another application how you can see when the inner loop is dependent of the outer loop. So these applications are more rarely than the first examples we have seen, but they're also used sometimes. So it's good to have an understanding for this as well. Okay, so that's it for today. So you should have now a clear vision of how nested loops works. We learned how we can print a quadrant. we print the same amount of rows as columns, we can sum up values inside of the nested loops, and we have seen how we can make the inner loop runs dependent on the outer loop runs. And now you have another tool to become a very good programmer. Alright guys, so that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and we see you in the next one. So a quick reminder guys, if you liked the video so far, please give me a like and subscribe. It would help me a lot for the YouTube algorithm to grow this channel. Thanks.